the civil rights movements and like the Black freedom. Do you recall like how old you were when you started noticing like, racial differences or anything like that?
Racial differences?
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much as soon as I got into the Army. Growing up in Alaska, there were, other than the Alaskan Indians, we really didn't have any blacks. We didn't have any real foreigners, you know. So I don't think I ever grew up being racially influenced. You know, I didn't think of black people as bad, and I didn't think of Indian people as bad. I didn't think of any of that. And after I was there about 3 weeks, I was talking to an instructor, and I said, "Where are the people going to graduate from here? Germany or Alaska?" And he started laughing. He said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, my recruiter said I'd either go to Germany or Alaska." And he said, "All of you guys go to Vietnam." Well, that's what they told everybody.
Yeah.
It was communism. But if you really start digging into it, I think you're going to find that a lot of people felt it was more about oil.
Defense Secretary Robert McNamara holds a dramatic press conference only a few hours after the first U.S. bombings of oil dumps outside the North Vietnamese cities of Hanoi and Haiphong. The attack was a 46-plane airstrike with both Air Force and Navy jet bombers participating. According to estimates, the raid cost North Vietnam about 40% of its gas and oil reserves. Secretary McNamara stressed the fact that only military targets were hit by the bombers.
The strikes against these petroleum facilities were initiated to counter a mounting reliance by North Vietnam on the use of trucks and powered junks to facilitate the infiltration of men and equipment from North Vietnam to South Vietnam.
The press was still controlled. And when I was working on the communication side, we would know, we didn't know all the intel, we didn't know all of it, but we would know, okay, up near the DMZ there was a firefight. And during that firefight, 7 U.S. soldiers were killed. But then, what we'd hear on the news is that 3 were killed.
You mentioned the DMZ zone. What's that?
Well, that's the demilitarized zone, and that was between North Vietnam and South Vietnam. There was a zone there. It was like the states have their own borders. Well, these had their borders, and it was called a demilitarized zone. So the South Vietnamese were on one side, the North Vietnamese were on the other, and that was a zone nobody was supposed to cross. But a lot of times attacks would come from that zone, and both ways. We'd go into them, and they'd come into us.
So I'm just going to ask you some questions about your experience with, like, the Vietnam War and stuff in that time period. So before the war, when did you become aware of a conflict? Like,
I knew about a conflict when I was in high school because the Vietnam War was going on at the time.
mm-hmm.
So I was well aware of it, and I also knew that when I graduated, I had a very high potential of being drafted and being drafted into the Army, which meant that all likelihood I would have to actually carry a gun and fight. So
I take it you were drafted then?
no, because I knew that there was a high potential that I would be drafted, I decided to join so I wouldn't have to go to Vietnam.
So what did you end up? What did you sign up for then? What did you
Well, when I was living in Alaska, and I signed up. I knew some guys that worked on a missile site in Alaska, and they were in the Army, and I was talking to them, and they said, oh, easy job working on a missile site. So I got a hold of a recruiter, and I said, I don't want to go to Vietnam. I want to stay somewhere like Germany or Alaska. And he said, hellfire and heavy fire at times, microwave communication on a missile site. So I got a hold of a recruiter, and I said, I don't want to go to Vietnam. I want to stay somewhere like Germany or Alaska. And he said, and I said, missile maintenance is one thing I'm interested in. He said, okay, we'll put you in for missile maintenance, but just in case missile maintenance classes are full, we'll put you in microwave communication, which is telephones and that type of stuff. He called me up about 2 weeks later, and he said, well, missile maintenance courses are all full. We can't get you into that. He said, but we can get you into microwave communication. And I said, okay, what does that mean? He said, well, you'll either go to Germany or to Alaska. I said, well, that was good. I was happy with that. So I signed on the dotted line, and I joined the Army in December of 1969. And I went through my basic training in Washington State, Fort Lewis, Washington. And then I did my microwave communication training in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. So I wound up going to Vietnam. So I landed in Vietnam, I think it was November about 1970. And wasn't real happy about it, but at that time there wasn't anything I could do about it. I had already signed on the dotted line and signed up for 3 years, and I didn't have an option. When they gave me my orders, I had to go to Vietnam. But fortunately for me, because I was in microwave communication and because of the assignment I got, I didn't wind up being in. Some of my friends went to the DMZ zone, and they were under shell fire and heavy fire at times, So, but I never experienced any of that. I was in Saigon, I was in Phu Lam and Vung Tau, and although the conflict was going on around us, I was never really involved in it, in the actual fighting side of things. Mine was the communicating side, making sure telephones were working and communications were working. So I was fortunate that way. But fortunately, I wasn't in that area, so I didn't see that side of the conflict. I was in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. Because I was a guidon bearer, I had I had a private room. It was for 2 of us, and the guy that was the other guidon bearer with me was a black guy, and he and I were good friends. We got along well. Having said all that, when you're a soldier in the Army, if you go to the rec room and you want to sit down and watch TV, it's a big deal because you don't get to do it very often. And they have a big rec room. 7 or 8, 10, 20 guys can go in there and sit down. There's only one TV, so you have to kind of watch whatever everybody agrees to. Mm-hmm. And that was fine. We all learned to live with that. But there were a couple of times when there would be 5 or 6 of us white guys sitting in the rec room. And then 3 or 4 black guys would come in, and they would just go switch the channel to whatever they wanted to watch without asking, without anything. But they did it as much to try to get a rise out of us as the fact that they just wanted to watch something because there was a lot of tension between white and blacks in the military.
Okay. Did you agree with the U.S. involvement in Vietnam, or were you?
Well, it wasn't that I didn't I didn't want to go to Vietnam, and I didn't really want to see my friends and everybody go to Vietnam. But at that time, I don't know that I put a lot of thought into the whole process. But I went to Southern Oregon College before I left, and they were having a big rally there against the Vietnam War, and there were a lot of people talking. A lot of people opposed it, and I got to hear some of their points of view, and I began to understand kind of the other side of the thinking. I felt it was my duty in a way, but I didn't really think about all of the ramifications of what the war meant and what was involved. And looking back on it now, I would say no. I would oppose it. I wouldn't have agreed to it. But at the time, I was more or less ambivalent. I didn't get too excited one way or the other. I didn't want to go, but I didn't get too excited about it one way or the other. So.
What were some of your most memorable experiences?
In Vietnam?
Mm-hmm. Or just during the experience?
No, in Vietnam, I actually...
what did you think of your officers or fellow soldiers or whoever you worked with?
Well, one thing about Vietnam was drugs were very rampant. And when I first arrived, the two guys that picked me up shortly after I got there, they offered me mums, which was marijuana soaked in opium. And I didn't accept it. I didn't want any part of that. But what I did see when they first picked me up at the airport, two guys, nice guys, but when they picked me up at the airport, they were, smart, intelligent, capable. But within about 6 months, they had gotten into harder drugs, and they had gotten into opium and cocaine and a few other things. And within 6 months, basically, these two guys, we were having to hide them during inspections because they were absolutely worthless. They couldn't think straight. They couldn't do anything right. Because they were our friends, there were a couple other guys and we managed to kind of protect them from that. But overall, I had a very good friend there, very nice guy. He was from Minnesota, if I remember right, and we all got along well. The guys that I worked with on the site, we all got along well. My two commanding officers, my sergeant major and the major, I rode around with them all the time, so I had a good relationship with them. But officers in Vietnam treated